The sun rose slow over the wide western land where dry wind moved across grass and dust and old memories lived in silence. The ranch stood alone near a shallow river with cottonwood trees bending like tired elders. A lone rancher named Caleb began his day before the light fully touched the hills. He carried water, mended fences, and spoke little because the land understood him. Without words, his life had been shaped by loss and duty and the long road of survival. After the war took his family and the years took his youth, he learned to live with quiet strength and a heart kept guarded like a locked chest buried deep in the soil. That morning the land felt different. The birds were restless and the horses stamped the ground. As if sensing change, Caleb felt it too, a pressure in the air like a story about to begin. He rode out to check the northern boundary, where cliffs met open plain. As he moved through tall grass, he noticed tracks, not from deer, not from cattle, but human and heavy, as if made by someone tall and strong. He followed them toward the rocks where shadows stayed cool even under the rising sun. There he saw her standing near a fallen tree, a giant Apache girl taller than any woman. He had known her hair was dark and long, falling over a woven cloak. Her eyes held both fire and fear. She did not run when she saw him. Instead, she raised her chin as if ready to face whatever fate brought. Her presence filled the space between them like thunder before rain. Caleb stopped and rested his hand away from his rifle to show peace. The silence stretched long. Then she spoke in a voice deep yet trembling. She said, "It has been so long since I've been near a man." Her words carried pain, loneliness, and courage. She told him her name was Ayanna, and that her people had scattered after soldiers burned their camp. She had wandered alone through harsh land, hiding from those who hunted her. Kind, her size made her strong, but also made her a target. Caleb listened without interrupting. He felt something stir inside him, a pull he had not felt in years. He saw not a threat, but a soul surviving against cruelty. He offered her water and food and a place to rest, though he did not know why he trusted her so easily. Perhaps it was the honesty in her eyes, or the way the land itself seemed to approve. As they walked toward the ranch, Ayanna spoke of her past. She spoke of songs by the fire, lessons from elders of a world that was fading. She said she had learned to be silent, to survive, to hide her strength, to carry grief alone. Caleb shared little, but his quiet presence told its own story of endurance. When they reached the ranch, she paused, unsure if she was welcome. Caleb nodded and said, "You are safe here for now." The day passed with small acts of kindness. Ayanna helped with chores or strength, making hard work easier. Caleb showed her where to sleep in the old barn, warm and clean. As evening fell, they sat near the fire. The sky burned orange and purple, and stars began to appear. Ayanna stared at the flames and whispered that loneliness can be heavier than hunger. Caleb felt the truth of her words settle in his bones. That night, as the wind moved through the plains, both of them lay awake under different roofs, yet bound by the same feeling that something important had begun, a meeting, not a chance. But purpose. The land watched and waited as two broken paths crossed under the wide western sky. Morning came soft and pale across the ranch. The light slipped through wooden cracks and rested on the floor where Ayanna sat awake long before the sun rose fully. She had slept little. The unfamiliar safety made her restless. Because peace was something she had learned not to trust, she stepped outside and breathed the cool air, feeling the earth beneath her bare feet, grounding her like old prayers from her people. Caleb was already awake, working near the corral. He noticed her presence without turning at first. He sensed her the way he sensed storms or changing seasons. When he finally looked at her, he nodded in quiet greeting. There was no fear between them, only caution mixed with respect. They worked side by side in silence, feeding horses, repairing a loose post, carrying water from the well. The rhythm of shared labor began to build a fragile bridge between two wounded lives. As the sun climbed higher, Ayanna spoke again. She told Caleb of the days after her tribe fell apart, how she hid in mountains and forests, how strangers looked at her with fear or greed, how her size made her a legend, whispered in cruel ways. She said she had not chosen to be alone, but had learned to survive it. She said the absence of human touched, the absence of trust, had carved an ache inside her deeper than any wound. Caleb listened and felt his chest tighten. He understood loneliness, though his was shaped differently. He told her his wife lost the sickness of a child buried under a lone tree near the river, years spent speaking only to animals and land. He said the world had taken much from him, but had not taken his will. To be kind, his words were simple, but carried weight like stones placed carefully one by one. Later that day, dark clouds gathered in the distance. A storm approached fast, the wind picked up, and the horses grew uneasy. Caleb moved quickly to secure the barn. Ayanna followed, using her strength to hold doors steady against the rising gusts. Thunder cracked loud across the sky, and rain began to fall hard and sudden. They took shelter together. Inside the barn, the sound of rain drumming on the roof surrounded them like a living thing. In the dim light, Ayanna felt memories rise, fear of soldiers, fear of being trapped, fear of violence. Her breathing grew heavy, Caleb noticed, and spoke calmly, grounding her in the present. He told her she was not alone here. He said the storm would pass like all storms do. A steady voice cut through the noise, and slowly her breath found its rhythm again. As the rain continued, Ayanna told him something she had never spoken aloud. She said it had been so long since she had been near a man that she no longer knew how to trust closeness. She feared both longing and rejection. She feared being seen, yet feared being invisible. Her confession was not weakness, but truth laid bare. Caleb did not step closer. He did not reach out. He simply sat nearby, giving her space while staying present. He said trust grows like grass, slow and patient. And only when the ground is ready. He said she did not owe him anything, not her story, not her presence, not her courage, his respect, surprise, or more than any kindness she had known. When the storm finally eased, the air felt clean, and new sunlight broke through clouds, casting gold across what earth. Ayanna stepped outside and lifted her face to the sky. Feeling something inside her shift, the ranch no longer felt like just a place to hide. It felt like a place where healing might begin. That evening they shared a simple meal, bread, beans, and water, tasted richer than any feast. Because it was shared without fear as night settled, Ayanna realized for the first time in many seasons she was not counting escape routes or listening for danger. She was simply there, present and breathing. Caleb watched the fire and thought about how the land had brought her to him not as a burden, but as a lesson. He felt his guarded heart begin to open just enough to let light in. Both of them sensed that the days ahead would test them, but also transform them. Under the wide sky, two lonely spirits rested closer to hope than either had been in years. The next days unfolded slowly like a careful song. Each morning Ayanna woke with the sun, and each night she slept a little deeper than before the ranch became familiar to her. The creek, with the smell of hay, the sound of horses breathing. Caleb noticed changes in her nodding strength, which was always there, but in her eyes, which slowly lost some of their constant alertness. They began to talk more as they worked. Ayanna asked about the land, and Caleb told her stories of seasons, droughts, floods, and how the earth remembers everything. He showed her how to read the sky, how clouds speak before rain, how animals move before change. She listened closely, learning not as a child, but as a woman reclaiming a future. One afternoon they rode together toward the river. The path was narrow and lined with tall grass. The water shimmered under the sun, and the cottonwood trees stood nearby. The one Caleb had mentioned before he stopped there and told her about his child buried beneath its roots. His voice did not break, but the pain lived quietly inside each word. Ayanna stepped closer, not touching, but standing beside him, sharing the weight of silence. She said her people believed. Spirits lived in trees and watched over. The living Caleb nodded, and for the first time in years, he felt that maybe his child was not alone. As they sat by the river, Ayanna spoke of her dreams. She said she dreamed of running freely, without hiding or standing tall. Without fear of being hunted, she dreamed of singing again, something she had not done since her tribe fell. She admitted that being near Caleb stirred feelings. She had buried deep fear, hope, longing, and confusion. She said she did not know what place she held in the world anymore. Caleb told her that sometimes the world breaks us, so we can rebuild ourselves stronger and truer. He said she did not need to decide her future today. He said the ranch was a place to rest, not a cage. He promised that if she chose to leave, he would not stop her, and if she chose to stay, she would be respected. His words gave her something she had not known in years: choice. As they returned to the ranch, they noticed smoke rising from the distance, not from the ranch, but from the hills. Ayanna stiffened, instantly recognizing danger. Her body remembered before her mind did. She told Caleb that soldiers or hunters sometimes burn land to drive people out. Caleb felt tension grip his chest. He knew the frontier was cruel, and law often followed power, not justice. That night, they prepared quietly, securing supplies and watching the horizon. Ayanna sharpened a blade. She carried a family heirloom. Her movements were calm, but her eyes were sharp. Caleb respected her readiness. He realized she was not someone to protect as a helpless soul, but someone to stand beside. When darkness fell, figures appeared near the edge of the land. 3 men riding slow, scanning the area. Their laughter carried on the wind rough, and careless Ayanna recognized the way. They looked at the land, like it was theirs to take. Her heart pounded, but she did not hide. Instead, she stood tall beside Caleb, visible and unashamed. The men approached closer until they saw her clearly. Their laughter faded, replaced by shock and unease. One of them spoke with mockery, asking what kind of creature she was. Caleb stepped forward and said she was under protection, and that they should move on. His voice was steady but firm, like the land itself. Tension stretched long and heavy. The men looked between Caleb and Ayanna, measuring risk. Finally, they turned away, muttering threats, but retreating into the dark. The danger passed for now, But the message was clear: safety was fragile. After they were gone, Ayanna felt her knees weaken, not from fear alone, but from the realization that someone had stood for her openly. Caleb placed a hand on the fence, grounding both of them. He said the world could be cruel, but it could also be changed one stand at a time. That night, Ayanna sang softly near the fire a song of loss and survival. Her voice carried across the land, rising into the stars. Caleb listened with eyes closed, feeling something heal. Inside him, a ranch no longer felt empty. It felt alive again with purpose and connection. Both knew the road ahead would not be easy, but in that moment under quiet sky, they understood that courage shared becomes strength, and that healing often begins when two broken stories choose to walk forward together. The following morning carried a heavy stillness. The land seemed to hold its breath after the night encounter. Ayanna woke with a tight feeling in her chest, not fear alone, but awareness. She knew the men who had come would speak of what they saw. Stories would travel faster than truth on the frontier. Being different meant being remembered, and remembered often meant being hunted. Caleb sensed a shift. As well, he moved with purpose, checking perimeter, reinforcing gates, and hiding supplies in places only he knew. Ayanna helped without being asked. Her strength turned hard labor into swift work, yet beneath the motion, both felt the same question growing: what happens when the world comes closer? As the sun climbed, Ayanna asked Caleb why he stayed alone on this land when danger was always near. He paused before answering. He said this land was the last place his family laughed together. The soil held their footprints, and the wind carried their voices. Leaving would feel like losing them again. Ayanna understood deeply. She said her people believed land and memory were bound, and that leaving sacred ground was like tearing part of the soul away. Later that day, Ayanna walked alone toward the hills. She needed space to think, to remember who she was before fear shaped her days. She climbed a ridge and looked out across the plains. Her height gave her a wide view of the world, and for the first time it felt like a gift, not a curse. She lifted her arms and let the wind wrap around her, feeling strong and alive. From the ridge, she saw dust in the distance. More riders this time, 5, maybe 6, moving fast. Her heart dropped. She ran back toward the ranch, moving like a storm herself. Caleb saw her coming and read the warning in her face. They had little time. Together, they planned quickly. Ayanna suggested using the terrain, drawing the riders away from the ranch. Caleb trusted her instincts. Without hesitation, they had supplies, loose, and horses, and prepared a decoy trail leading toward the rocky ravine nearby. When the riders arrived, they followed the false signs, believing they were chasing prey. Ayanna and Caleb watched from cover as the men disappeared into the ravine, where narrow paths and loose stones slowed them. The riders cursed and shouted frustration, echoing off the rocks. The land itself seemed to resist them. After some time, they turned back angry and empty-handed, riding away with threats lost to the wind. When silence returned, Ayanna felt both relief and sorrow. She said this would not be the last time. People who fear what they do not understand always come back. Caleb nodded. He said, then we must decide what future we choose, not what they force upon us. That evening they spoke openly by the fire. Ayanna admitted that staying here put Caleb in danger. She said she lived too long running and did not want her presence to destroy the one place that felt safe. Caleb replied that safety without purpose was only another kind of emptiness. He said the land had chosen her path to cross his, and he would not turn away from that responsibility. Ayanna felt tears rise, but she did not let them fall. She said her tribe taught that family was not only blood, but those who stand with you when the world turns dark. Caleb smiled softly and said then perhaps this land was meant to hold a new kind of family. As night deepened, they sat close enough to feel warmth. Without touching, the distance between them was no longer filled with fear, but with understanding. Ayanna realized that being near a man no longer felt like a wound. It felt like a beginning built on respect and choice. The stars burned bright overhead, silent witnesses to a bond forming not in haste or desire, but in shared trials and quiet courage. The world outside remained dangerous, but within that circle of firelight, something unbreakable was taking shape. Both of them knew that the hardest test was still ahead, yet they also knew they would not face it alone, and for the first time in many years, that truth felt stronger than any fear. The days that followed demanded strength from both of them. The riders did not return, but their absence did not bring peace. It brought waiting, and waiting was its own kind of battle. Ayanna felt in her bones a sense that something larger was moving toward them like a storm still beyond the horizon. Caleb felt it too, and prepared without panic, teaching Ayanna the hidden paths, the water sources, and the signals he used to read danger. One morning, Ayanna stood at the edge of the ranch and spoke with certainty. She said running forever was not living. She said her people once stood their ground when the time came, not with hatred, but with dignity. She said she would not hide any more. Caleb listened Carefully knowing the weight of her words, he asked if she was ready for the cost. She answered that she already paid once when she lost her people, and would not pay it again with her spirit. That afternoon a group arrived, not soldiers this time, but settlers' families' wagons and tired faces. They had heard stories, and came with fear mixed with curiosity when they saw Ayanna. They froze, some whispered, others reached for weapons. Caleb stepped forward and spoke first. He said she was under his roof, and that she meant no harm. He spoke calmly about loss, about fear, and about how the land was big enough for many stories. Ayanna then stepped forward, taller than all of them, her voice carried across the open space. She spoke of who she was, not a monster, not a legend, but a woman who survived. She spoke of her tribe, of what was taken. And what remained, she said, strength did not mean cruelty, and difference did not mean danger. Her words were simple but powerful, shaped by truth. The settlers listened, some eyes softened, others remained hard. One man lowered his weapon. A woman stepped closer and offered bread to Ayanna. Without a word, that small act broke something, opened the tension, eased not fully, but enough to allow breathing, enough to allow possibility. As the settlers moved on the ranch, felt change, word would spread. But now the story would carry more than fear. It would carry a face, a voice, a moment of courage. Ayanna felt something settle inside her, a sense that standing tall had meaning beyond survival. That night, Caleb and Ayanna sat together, watching the fire fade into embers. Ayanna said she no longer felt invisible or hunted. She felt seen. Caleb replied that courage often teaches others how to see what they fear before he admitted that her presence had given his life direction again. Not just something to protect, but something to believe in. Ayanna looked at him and said it had been so long since she had been near a man that she forgot closeness could be gentle. She said trust once broken takes time to rebuild. But today she felt a strong foundation forming. Caleb nodded and said foundations are built stone by stone, not rushed, not forced. They sat quietly, sharing warmth and silence. Both knew the world beyond the ranch would remain uncertain, but within themselves something had shifted. Fear no longer ruled their choices, purpose did. As the fire died down, Ayanna felt ready for whatever came next, not because she was no longer afraid, but because she was no longer alone, and Caleb felt the same understanding settle in his heart. The land rested under the stars, holding their footsteps, and their promise. The final test was near, but so was a future shaped by courage, truth, and shared strength. The final days of summer arrived with quiet certainty. The land no longer felt like a battleground, but like a witness to change. Ayanna woke before dawn and stood facing the horizon. She felt the presence of her ancestors in the wind and the strength of her own choices rooted in the earth. She was no longer running and no longer hiding. She was standing exactly where she chose to be. Caleb joined her. Without words, they shared the silence that had once been lonely, but now felt full. The ranch had become more than shelter, had become a place of meaning, a place where two broken paths had joined and created something new together. They began the day not out of fear, but out of intention. Later that morning, a rider arrived alone, carrying no weapon. He brought news that the men who once hunted rumors had moved on, seeking easier targets. The world had shifted its attention, as it often did. The danger was not gone forever, but the threat had loosened its grip. Caleb thanked the rider and watched him disappear into the distance. Ayanna felt relief, but also clarity. She said safety was never permanent, but courage could be. She said her people believed that when fear is faced, it loses its power. Caleb agreed and said the land teaches the same lesson. Storms pass, but the ground remains. As the sun climbed higher, Ayanna gathered stones near the cottonwood tree. She placed them carefully in a circle, honoring those she lost. She sang again, her voice strong and steady, carrying across the river and plains. This time her song was not only of grief, but of endurance and hope. Caleb stood nearby, listening, feeling the past settle into peace. When the song ended, Ayanna turned to Caleb and spoke with calm strength. She said being near a man no longer defined or painted, now reminded her of trust rebuilt through respect. She said she had found not romance or rescue, but partnership and dignity. Caleb replied that he had not saved her, and she had not saved him. They had simply chosen to walk forward together. As evening fell, they shared a meal and laughter, something rare and precious. The ranch felt alive with possibility. Plans were spoken, allowed seasons to prepare for crops, to plant horses, to raise. Ayanna spoke of teaching children stories someday, so they would learn courage without hatred. Caleb spoke of building a future that honored the past without being trapped by it. When night came, they sat beneath the stars side by side. The distance between them was gone, not because it was forced, but because it no longer needed to exist. They were equals, bound by choice and respect. The land stretched endlessly around them, open and welcoming. Ayanna looked at the sky and felt whole for the first time since her world had burned. She knew her journey had not ended, but had found direction. Caleb felt the same peace settle within him a peace earned not given. Under the wide western sky, their story did not end, it began anew, rooted in true strength and shared humanity, a story not of fear or legend, but of two souls who refused to be defined by loss and instead chose hope.